The government's response to climate change is built on three pillars. First, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that is our carbon pollution. Second, adapting to climate change that we cannot avoid. And third, helping to shape a global solution. And I want to discuss how each pillar addresses the challenges I have outlined. Australia must reduce its own emissions as part of the global effort to tackle climate change. The first pillar, reducing Australia's carbon pollution, is marked by our commitment to a target of reducing carbon pollution by 60% of 2000 levels by 2050. We will deliver measures to reduce carbon pollution at least cost, and with greatest potential to drive new growth, create jobs and develop new industries. At the heart of our efforts to reduce emissions will be the Australian Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme. Until now, we have failed to place any limit or put any price on the carbon pollution we have produced. And the costs of climate change have not been reflected in the costs of business or the price of goods and services. And because firms face no cost from increasing emissions, the level of emissions is too high. The Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme will reduce carbon pollution. Tackling climate change will not be easy, and this scheme is a significant economic reform. But this is not a choice between a no-cost option and an option with costs. It is a choice between taking responsible action now or neglecting to act and facing much higher costs later. The second pillar is adapting to climate change that we cannot avoid. Climate change resulting from human influences is already underway, so we must prepare ourselves for the inevitable changes already built into the climate system. The Australian Government will drive national efforts to increase our ability to respond effectively to the impacts of climate change, to provide decision makers with the information and tools they need to understand and assess the risks of climate change impacts, and support businesses, communities and governments to develop and implement strategies to manage their risks from the impacts of climate change. For example, the First Pass National Coastal Vulnerability Assessment will identify areas and assets in the coastal zone that are most at risk from climate change impacts. This First Pass assessment will be completed by the end of 2008. Building resilience to climate change is also critical for highly vulnerable Pacific Island countries, and the government is listening to what our neighbours in the Pacific are saying. We're already assisting those nations plan for and undertake practical action on the ground to respond to the impacts of climate change. We've committed $150 million over the next 3 years to address high priority climate adaptation needs. And this package will primarily focus on the Pacific and East Timor and invest $35 million in the 2008-9 year. Working with partner nations, the initiative aims to improve scientific information on and understanding of climate change impacts, assist strategic planning and vulnerability assessment, support the implementation of priority adaptation measures, and contribute to major multilateral adaptation funds. Some in our region also face being displaced by climate change. If this happens, we will work with others, particularly other countries in our region, to respond to the needs of people displaced by climate change. If resettlement becomes necessary, it is preferable to assist people in resettling within their own country, recognising that in general the best option is for people to be displaced to the least extent possible. The third pillar of the government's approach to climate change is helping to shape a global solution to this global problem. This is why the first act of the Rudd government was to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Ratifying Kyoto put Australia back on the map. It sent a clear message that Australia is stepping up to the challenge of climate change. For the first time, we are a full negotiating partner in all key international forums. And we are committed to working towards a post-2012 agreement for addressing climate change, an agreement that is equitable and effective, and that includes agreement on a long-term global goal for emissions reductions. This will be a hard and long road. Any post-2012 approach needs to secure widespread agreement from countries with diverse interests and entrenched positions. Nevertheless, we are committed to playing an active role in these multilateral negotiations, We have no other option. In working towards a post-2012 agreement, we understand that the developed world has to lead. Our policies to make substantial cuts to domestic emissions by mid-century underline that leadership, as do our commitments to assist countries in our region adapt to climate change. The Prime Minister reinforced at the G8 meeting that it is the decisions made by the major economies that will determine whether the poorest and most vulnerable states will survive in the face of climate change. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to work effectively with our Pacific partners. The New Aid Declaration on Climate Change that was released at the Pacific Island Forum last week is a step in this direction. It commits forum members, including Australia, to developing ways of combating climate change which are tailored to the Pacific, and it commits members to supporting in international forums the recognition of the threats facing Pacific Islands from climate change. The Australian Government will build our relationship on climate change with our Pacific neighbours. This includes helping them with the implementation of the Pacific Islands Framework for Action on Climate Change that was agreed by Pacific Island Forum leaders in 2005. As I said at the outset, we see our climate change strategy as a responsibility agenda. The Rudd government is taking responsibility for the serious challenges that climate change presents, and we are asking all Australians to do the same. So I welcome the contribution that the People's Assembly is making to the task ahead of us, and I thank you for your work. I'm sure your debate has been fruitful, and again, my apologies that I could not attend. I certainly look forward to receiving your recommendations through my representative, Australia's Special Envoy on Climate Change, Mr. Howard Bamsey. Thank you very much.